Jack Harris uncovered a decades-old injustice, a forgotten mine concealing stolen gold and a web of corruption involving powerful officials. The men who buried the truth, protecting their wealth and influence, betrayed not only the law, but the trust of an entire town. Guided by Sergeant Daniels's journal and loyal Max, Jack risked everything to reveal what they tried so hard to hide. But just listen to how shocking the turn of events in this drama was, and why justice ultimately prevailed. Jack Harris had fought in places most people couldn't imagine, deserts where the air burned, mountains where frost bit through boots, and towns where survival came at the cost of everything. But nothing had prepared him for this, the battlefield of his own life. Returning home, he had expected gratitude, respect, a chance to rebuild. Instead, he found silence. Letters unanswered, benefits delayed, doors closed. Years after his discharge, Jack was living in a worn-down shelter on the edge of Fort Collins, Colorado. The Army had given him medals and honor, but the world had taken everything else: his home, his dignity, his peace. Debt collectors called at odd hours. Every paycheck was swallowed by rent or medical bills he could barely afford. Nights were the hardest. Nights he spent with Max, curled at his side. Max wasn't just a dog. He was the last thread of loyalty in Jack's life, a living reminder that someone still cared without expectation. On a late autumn afternoon, the sky was low and heavy, bruised with clouds that promised rain. Jack had been walking the edge of an abandoned logging road outside town, hoping for some quiet. Max padded beside him, ears alert, tail stiff. Then, without warning, Max stopped. His whole body stiffened. Without hesitation, he broke into a run, disappearing into the trees. "Max, wait!" Jack called, voice sharp. But the dog didn't hesitate. Something in Max's urgency pulled at Jack. Not just loyalty, but an instinct. Jack's boots sank into the wet earth as he followed. Rain began to fall, slow at first, then heavier, washing the world in gray. They pushed deeper into the forest until Jack spotted something strange. Half hidden under moss and vines was a rusted iron gate. The gate looked as if it hadn't been touched in decades, locked in time, bent under the weight of years. Behind it lay the entrance to something vast, a collapsed mine. The air was damp and smelled of earth and something older, something hidden. Jack crouched beside the gate, running a hand over the cold metal. His breath came fast. A wave of irritation rose first. How could something like this exist without anyone knowing? A place of such scale, so close to the town, and no one cared enough to mention it. The gate felt like a wound in the earth, ignored by everyone but somehow calling to him. Max growled low, a sound that made the hairs on Jack's neck rise. Jack pushed the gate aside with effort. The noise echoed inside the hollow space, swallowed by the silence beyond. He stepped closer, boots crunching on gravel, heart pounding. Beneath the wet dirt near the entrance, his fingers scraped against something hard. A metal box, corroded and dented, bore an insignia he knew instantly. It was a military emblem, one from his own years in service. His stomach tightened. Jack pried it open. Inside lay a bundle of items that felt like a whisper from another time: maps, worn photographs, and a small journal, its leather cracked and pages yellowed. The name inside made Jack stop cold. Sergeant Daniels. Daniels had been his friend, his squad leader during deployment, a man who had trusted Jack with his life. Jack's hands shook as he opened the journal. The pages told a story that made blood boil, Notes about gold, stolen, buried, and hidden. Names of people in positions of trust who had covered it up. Orders that had been twisted, rewritten, erased. A betrayal not just of soldiers, but of an entire community. The words burned inside him. This wasn't just history. This was injustice, deliberate, cold, and deep. Jack stared into the collapsing darkness of the mine and felt something shift inside him. The anger was sharp, a living thing, a promise that he wouldn't let it stay buried. Max sat beside him, watching quietly as rain ran down his muzzle. Jack clenched the journal to his chest. Somewhere in that mine lay answers, and somewhere inside him a resolve was born. He was going to uncover the truth. Jack Harris walked into town with a weight heavier than his worn duffel bag. The journal in his coat pocket felt like a lead stone pressing against his ribs. That box in the mine had opened something he couldn't ignore, but telling someone about it was another battle altogether. He tried, to friends, to strangers, even to the sheriff. Sheriff Cole was a grizzled man with decades on the force, the kind who believed in keeping things quiet rather than stirring trouble. When Jack approached him at the station, hands gripping the journal like a lifeline, Cole leaned back in his chair, a sigh of tired disbelief on his face. "Son, I've heard it all before," he said. "Another vet chasing ghosts. Best you let it go." That dismissal cut deeper than the rain-soaked woods where Jack had found the mine. The next days were worse. Jack began to notice it, the subtle following. At first, it was a figure in the shadows, a man in a dark suit who seemed always to appear where Jack was, just far enough away to stay unseen until Jack turned. At the diner, on the main street, even when Jack was walking Max through the park. There was no direct threat, but the presence was deliberate. He was being watched. Jack's stomach tightened. The anger he felt in the mine shifted into something sharper, pain. This wasn't just a forgotten mine. It was a secret someone wanted buried, forever. And the deeper Jack dug, the more he realized how much was at stake. This wasn't petty theft or a mistake in judgment. The mine was part of something far larger, a deliberate cover-up involving people still in positions of power. Days became weeks. Jack's life became a haze of tension and exhaustion. He moved from place to place, sleeping in abandoned barns, leaning against cracked walls for rest. Max stayed at his side through it all, his presence the only constant. Nights were the hardest. Jack would wake to silence, broken by the sound of rain against old wood, Max's low growl somewhere nearby. Each sound felt like a warning, and every shadow a threat. Jack kept returning to the journal. Sergeant Daniels's writing was desperate, fragmented in places, but the message was clear. Someone had buried the mine, destroyed the evidence, and silenced those who knew too much. Daniels had died under suspicious circumstances not long after uncovering the truth. Official reports called it an accident, but Jack knew better. It was another layer of betrayal, another proof that the truth was dangerous. The realization cut into Jack deeper than the physical exhaustion of the chase. Pain was no longer just in his body or his pride. It was in the knowledge that those he had once trusted, his country, his comrades, the justice system, had turned away. They had buried not only the mine, but the truth itself. Jack thought of Daniels, of his voice from the past, whispering through the journal. He thought of Max, waiting loyally at his side, despite the storms they walked together. He thought of the countless nights alone, heart pounding with fear and determination. The anger in him turned inward, became a quiet grief. But grief was not the end for Jack. Even in his pain, a spark remained. Somewhere in the darkness of that buried mine lay answers. Somewhere in the injustice was a way to fight back. Jack felt it in his bones. Daniels had started something that now belonged to him, and he could not stop until he finished it. So he kept walking, kept hiding, kept searching. Pain had become his companion, his reminder of the cost. But in that pain lived something stronger, a promise. Jack Harris would see this through, no matter what it took. Max padded beside him quietly as they disappeared into the cold night, their shadows swallowed by the rain. Jack Harris returned to the mine at dawn, the sky pale and cold over the Colorado hills. Rain from the days before had left the earth slick, and the air smelled of wet pine and iron. Jack felt different this time, heavier but certain. The pain that had weighed him down in recent weeks had shifted into something sharper, determination. Daniels's journal had a section marked with cryptic notes, a map that hinted at a hidden entrance deep in the mine. That was where Jack's hope now lay. Max stayed close, their footsteps silent on the moss-covered path. Jack had learned to trust the dog's instincts, and Max seemed to understand that this return was different. There was no hesitation in his movement, no pause as they approached the gate again. Jack felt it too. This was the moment to act. Weeks of careful work followed. Jack returned night after night, under cover of darkness, with tools salvaged from junkyards and barns. His clothes wore thin, and his hands grew raw, but the journal guided him like a beacon. Max never left his side, padding beside him quietly, as if guarding more than just a man. At times, Jack paused, staring at the mine's entrance and wondering if the truth was worth the risk. Then he would glance at the journal's worn pages and remember Daniels's last words. The world must know. One night, after hours of shifting earth and prying away old beams, Jack felt the ground give way beneath his feet. A narrow passage opened before him, hidden in shadow. The air inside smelled stale, coated with decades of silence. Jack ducked in, Max following without hesitation. Inside was a chamber carved long ago, and in the dim light Jack could see something gleam. He stepped closer and froze. Before him lay stacks of gold bars, covered in dust, but unmistakably real. Beside them was a weathered ledger, bound in cracked leather. Jack opened it, and the pages were filled with names, dates, amounts, a meticulous record of a conspiracy buried in plain sight. Politicians, businessmen, even law enforcement officers. Names he had heard before, names that had been trusted. Jack's heart pounded. He held in his hands the proof, not just of theft, but of corruption that had festered for decades. The journal and ledger together told a story Daniels had begun, but never finished. Now it was Jack's turn. Hope surged through him, but it was tempered with fear. The truth was powerful, but dangerous. Exposing it would not only dismantle a network of corruption, it would put him in their crosshairs. Jack knew the cost. He'd felt it before. Still, he could not walk away. Max sat quietly beside him, his gaze steady, as if urging him forward. Jack closed the ledger, his mind set. The first step was to find someone who would listen. Jack thought of Emily Carter, an investigative journalist known for going after stories others avoided. It took days to track her down. He found her in a cluttered newsroom in Denver, poring over a pile of notes for another case. Jack presented her with the journal, the ledger, and his own story. Emily listened without interruption, her expression shifting from skepticism to resolve. "This could bring the whole thing down," she said quietly. "But it's dangerous." "They'll come after you," Jack nodded. "I know. But it's time someone did it. No matter what, Emily agreed to publish the story, no matter the cost. She promised to protect him where she could. For the first time in weeks, Jack felt a light inside him. Hope. It was fragile, but it was there. For years, he had wandered in shadows. Now, he was stepping toward the light. As Jack left the newsroom that evening, Max at his heels, he felt the tide turning. Hope had arrived, and with it, the courage to face whatever came next. Jack knew it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, he believed he could finish what Daniels had started. The morning Emily Carter's expose hit the front page, Jack Harris woke to a storm of noise. His phone, an old battered thing he had avoided for months, rang without pause. News crews, reporters, strangers calling to ask about the story. In coffee shops, people whispered his name. In the streets of Fort Collins, heads turned when he walked by. Somewhere in the chaos, Jack felt the weight of something far larger than himself. Emily's article had struck deep. It exposed the decades-long theft, the names in the ledger, the mine hidden under layers of lies. Corruption was laid bare for everyone to see. Within days, arrests were made. Powerful politicians, influential businessmen, even law enforcement officers. The town was shaken, the truth spilling into every corner of the state. The mine, once buried and forgotten, was reopened, now a protected site for excavation and public record. Jack should have felt proud. But when cameras and microphones followed him, he felt a pull to step back. He wasn't interested in fame. He had wanted justice, not applause. And yet, that morning, a crowd gathered at the mine entrance. People from all walks of life, veterans, journalists, locals, activists, had come to see the man who had brought the truth to light. Jack stood before them, shoulders squared, rain still dripping from the dark pines. Max sat at his side, watching silently, his presence a reminder of all they had been through together. Jack cleared his throat, his voice steady but warm. "I fought wars overseas," he said, "but the hardest fight was here, for justice, for truth. We all have a duty to stand for what's right, even when it's dangerous. Even when no one else will." The crowd was silent for a moment, then erupted in applause. Jack stepped away from the microphone, letting the moment speak for itself. For years, the injustice had crushed him. Now it became his triumph. Jack knew his life would never be the same. He looked down at the gold, the evidence Daniels had risked his life to uncover. He could have kept it for himself, but that wasn't his way. The wealth became a means for something greater. Jack established a foundation dedicated to homeless veterans and rescue dogs, a cause close to his heart. He named it the Daniels Trust, in honor of his fallen friend. The foundation gave shelter to veterans, funding housing programs, job training, and mental health services. It rescued dogs from shelters, giving them homes with veterans who, like Jack, had once been abandoned by the world. Jack became not just a man with a story, but a man with a mission. The impact spread far beyond Fort Collins. Jack's story became a symbol, a reminder that courage wasn't about medals or recognition, but about standing for the truth, even when it cost everything. Communities began to speak up, inspired by the idea that buried truths could be uncovered. People began to demand accountability. A movement was quietly born. Jack and Max became a living legend. Wherever they went, people remembered the war veteran who had followed a dog into the woods and uncovered a truth no one dared speak of. Jack didn't call himself a hero. He simply said he had answered a call, not just for justice, but for all those who had been silenced. Years later, Jack stood again before a crowd at the mine. It was no longer a place of secrets, but a monument to perseverance. Children played nearby. Veterans spoke quietly with reporters, and Jack, older now but steady, placed his hand on Max's head. "Even in the darkest places," Jack said, "loyalty, courage, and perseverance can uncover the truth and change the world." Max looked up at him, tail wagging softly. Jack smiled. They had walked through shadow together, and now they had stepped into the light. The injustice that had once destroyed Jack's life had become a spark that changed a town, a movement, and a legacy. In truth, it was never just about the mine. It was about reminding the world that courage could still be found, even in the smallest of steps, even in the quiet loyalty of a dog. And for Jack Harris, that was enough.